Welcome to the Messy City Podcast, where we talk with the people who design, plan, build, develop, or even just think about how to create beautiful, successful, and humane cities and towns. Let's learn from each other and create places we truly care about. Welcome back to the Messy City Podcast. This is Kevin Klinkenberg. Not too often that I get a chance to talk with somebody who's really influenced things that I've done in a lot of ways. And today I'm really delighted to have one of those people who, especially on the architecture and the planning side, who's really quietly influenced a lot of things that I've done, and he doesn't probably even know that. So, but I'm really excited to have Ross Chapin on the podcast today. Ross, welcome to the show.
Kevin, I am just thrilled to be here. I've been an avid listener of your podcasts for quite a long time and really love the conversations that you get yourself into.
Well, that's I'm very honored to hear that. Thank you so much. Ross is an architect, and he has a book as well. The book is called Pocket Neighborhoods, Creating Small-Scale Communities in a Large-Scale World. But we're not really here to push a book. Buy the book. I'm sure the book is awesome. But Ross just has a body of work that is remarkable and has been incredibly influential in the architecture, and especially like the new urbanism world. And so I wanted to talk mostly about that and his work today. I do want to start a little bit with Ross. If you could just go ahead and give a little bit of the backstory of how Pocket Neighborhoods came to be and your own personal interest in developing this type of community.
Sure. Well, let's go back. Let's see. The scene is the mid-1990s. I live on Whidbey Island, north of Seattle. And if I were pursuing a career, I'd be in other places that I've lived, Minneapolis, maybe New York, San Francisco. But we found ourselves on Whidbey Island in a wonderful little community of about 1,000 people. And within some distance of Seattle, we could get in for the evening or get to the airport, which is great. And apparently, it is, this island has attracted other people. When Microsoft was taking off and some of the other big companies in Seattle, there were people with a lot of money coming to the island and wanting to build their homes, and some of them commuting and some of them just living here, a lot of retirees. And so the development that was happening in our small town was coming in, and the code was your standard 1970s and 80s code for suburban sprawl development. Streets with no alleys, no rear lane, encouraging larger sized homes and so forth. And I recognized that more than 60% of the people in our town and on the south end of the island were 1 and 2 person households, singles, empty nesters, people who really didn't need or want a larger family home. And yet that's what the code was pushing for, and that's what was happening. And so I was on the planning advisory board and working with our planner, Jack Lynch, and he had taken note in Seattle. The Pine Street Cottages happened, which was a renovation of a 1917 or 18 workman cottages, 400 square foot cottages, that instead of being torn down, they were renovated into detached cottages for sale. And they sold for crazy amounts of money, $81,000 for 400 square feet. Yeah. And that went into the national media. And Seattle loved it. And they said, let's do more of these. And Oh, you can't because it's against the law. It's illegal. And people went, no, wait a minute. So they drafted some codes to try to legalize this type of approach. And these were 10 cottages around that had a shared backyard. And the code could never get approved by the neighborhood jurisdictions. And the planner for our town had his feet in Seattle and said, let's take a look at this. So I worked with him and others in trying to modify this code. And our little town of Langley, Washington, had the first contemporary cottage housing zoning code in the country.
What year was that?
1996.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I'd spent 15 years, this is dating me here, I spent 15 years working very closely with local builders and doing some building myself on how to make small houses live large. I was realizing that when you have smaller houses, you have your livability quotient. In other words, the livability per square foot is much higher, and it feels better. You know, when you think about a houseboat or something like that, it really has a lot of livability in it. And most of the houses were dumb space, so they were low cost per square foot, but high cost really poor quality, poor value for the livability per square foot. So I was working on how to make small houses live large, and I was giving a talk in Seattle to a group of an eco-building group, and there was a developer there who listened to my talk and came up to me afterwards and said, God, I love all this, and tell me about this new code. I said, how do you know about it? Because I didn't mention it. And he said, I've been tracking this, and he wanted to come up to the island, and this is Jim Souls, and he came up to Whidbey, and we spent the afternoon together, and we began to talk about maybe we can test the code, we can demonstrate it. And so we became partners and formed a small company to get it going. And we ended up buying 4 lots. And the short story is that we built 8 cottages on 4 lots, about 2/3 of an acre. And we built it and sold it. And that was the first cottage court that I had done. And I'd not been really tracking history much. I didn't realize that in Pasadena and in LA in the 19-teens, the whole notion of the bungalow court typology came in. I didn't know that. What I did was to try to work with this and design something that made sense. Cottages around shared common space with room-sized porches, nested houses so that when you open your bedroom window, you're not saying, hi, Kevin, how'd you sleep last night? While you're looking back at me, hey, I'm not ready yet.
Yeah.
So the houses are friendly with one another. They have layers of privacy. They have engagement with the shared space, which is an intermediate zone between your private home and the public street. And so that was really important. And the common space made sense. The common space was useful, not just square footage that you could hardly use very well.
Yeah.
And the cars we put the car to the side so that you walk through the common area from the car door to your front door through the shared space. And I thought that made sense because I wanted to encourage conversations, activity among neighbors. So when the houses were framed up, we were under construction, and it's kind of a busy street out in front. And I was walking some people in that wanted to see it, and we were talking outside on the street and in rather loud voices because it's noisy out there. We walked through the little passage into the courtyard, and everything got really quiet. And we looked around, and I tried to describe things. And this person said, "Wow, what is this? I've never seen this." And I responded, "Oh, this is like a pocket, where you might keep your precious jewels." And then my next words that came out, it's a pocket neighborhood. And so these are pockets of nearby neighbors.
Huh.
That's the gist of it.
Interesting.
And over the years, with all they are really lovely. They have a lot of, I'm looking for the word there. They present well in the media and all the magazines and the videos and everything else, which is great. And so, and I pay attention to detail and things. And I live in a small Northwest town, and the style that I'm most comfortable with is essentially gabled houses with trim and real porches and windows that are proportioned well. And people, of course, respond to that. And that's what they think, cottage housing is. Cottage housing, in my mind, is not about style. It's about these essential patterns. And over the years, people are loving it. They're paying attention and wanting to do it themselves. They're inspired, but oftentimes they're missing the key essentials while they're trying to copy the look.
Right. So I do want to talk about some of those essentials, but I'm also curious, like at that point, you had this first one up and built and it sold. How did that change the course of what you were doing professionally in terms of like how that, because it must have been received, very favorably with media and everything else. Did that initially draw a lot of attention to you and your practice?
Wow. Well, that was a turning point in my whole career. I had been focusing on well-designed, smaller houses, right-sized is what I called them. And my first thing that was published was on the cover of Fine Home Building magazine for a smallish house for a family. And so I'd gotten some media attention. And when we completed our project, we didn't really push it. We didn't do pre-sales because it was so different. We wanted to try to get the details, get the whole thing right, and then it sold within a couple of months, and everybody was going, "What's that? What is this?" And then the media picked up on it, and within 2-3 months, it was in 200 newspapers around the country.
Wow! And
picked up by Fine Home Building magazine. They did their largest article ever, and Sarah Susanka included it in her Creating the Not So Big House book.
Mm-hmm.
And in a whole chapter, and that sold hundreds of thousands of copies. And then it went out to, in our world with development, it went out to quite a few places and it was appearing everywhere. And we weren't quite ready for that. But I was absolutely, It made sense, and I was so excited about it. And we went on with a development company and did another 5 or 6 projects, not only on the island but in the different in this region of Seattle, and to try to test this approach. And everywhere we did it, it tested really well. We built it, and it sold for higher per square foot costs than anything comparable. And yet it was less overall cost than what a person would want to buy or could normally buy in an area. So the cost per square foot was more, but the cost was less. And so people were purchasing it.
Did you see in the various ones that you've done on the island and in that region any commonalities and like the types of people that were attracted to the project, or did you find that it was very diverse, or were there certain kinds of people who really gravitated to the pocket neighborhoods?
When we first sold the houses, and this continued to a degree, I never thought it would be. There's a lot of single women. who are saying, I can buy a house on my own. I don't need a husband. We're shifting things. So there's more single women than I had recognized. A number of empty nesters, some young families. But given that the cottages were limited to 1,000 square feet, you can't have many larger households. We did a project in Kirkland, and they had a demonstration code underway. And what they said was they would invite architect developer teams to propose anything they want, and they'll consider it. And if they said yes, then you'd follow through and build it. You'd create a code and you'd follow through and build it. And then they would have a third party to review it and test it. And if it seemed like a good thing, the demonstration of one would then get applied citywide. So the city could try out a code. They could mock up a project without having any requirement to carry that code on. And so we built the Danielson Grove in Kirkland. And what we did was to write a code that said the sizes are limited to 1,000 square feet, and you could get double the density on the underlying density, or 1,500 square feet, you could get 1.5 times the density, the underlying density. And so we had then a code that would allow for a range of homes up to 1,500 square feet, which would allow in a wider range of households. And when I did that, I recognized that the community is stronger. You've got people, you've got families, and maybe you've got two income earners, and their kid comes home from school, and there are other adults around. You've got maybe you've got empty nesters, and their kids might be halfway across the country, and they have a meaningful relationship to be present with, the children and find other conversations among the community. You've got children who can, as they're growing up, they naturally want to go out and explore the world. Johnny, don't go out the door. It's not safe. Don't go out the gate. It's not safe. And in this case, the door's open. You go out on the porch, you go out the gate, and you're in a world it's got no cars. You've got other adults around looking. They've got playmates. They've got aunties and uncles and shirt-tail grandmas around. And it becomes a healthier community when you've got a diverse mix of households and a diverse mix of ages.
Yeah.
And because they were smaller and larger, there was a diverse mix of incomes. These were naturally affordable at that time.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know from working on a couple of these with people that you probably know as well that typically we kind of go on the small side. They're generally like single person households most often, sometimes 2-person households. But now as a father with small children, I look at these courts and I think, oh my God, this is a wonderful arrangement for families as well. And if you had a courtyard that had houses that were sized the right way or whatever, and the ability for kids to just run out and play, and you don't have to worry of traffic or anything else, plus the sociability aspect, it's just ideal for families.
Yeah. And I have tried to highlight that over the years. And I think the reason why the cottage court is taking off across the country is because of this.
Yeah.
Because you've got a safe world that is sociable. So it's creating a small scale community in a large scale world.
Yeah.
So I think safety, community is really important.
Yeah.
Community is great. But if you've got community without paying attention to personal space and privacy, it's claustrophobic.
Yeah.
I think it's challenging. So that's why attention to detail and that matters.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the details. You I want to refer a little bit to this. There's an article that you wrote not long ago for CNU Public Square. That's Rob Studeville's publication, which he does such a good job with. But this one is really about what you called the human side of housing. And there were a number of really interesting sort of detailed aspects. And I want to talk about these because for people who are interested in courtyard type communities, there's so many really good lessons and important details to make these function correctly that you outlined in the piece and that I know you have long experience with. But really that first one that came off the top was, human safety is a foundation, but it's sort of it's pairing safety with prospect and what you called prospect, which I guess sort of connecting with other human beings. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just that aspect of the design piece as you work on these communities.
When I'm working with communities now across the country and beyond, there is some pushback. Oh, we can't have that many houses. We can't do this. We can't do that. And or you've got NIMBY people talking about all the things that it would do, and who would want to live in such a dense place like that. And what I try to do is to say, well, let's go back to our human nature. We, going back hundreds of thousands of years, have evolved to be sociable in small groups. Yes, families, but not families in isolation, not households in isolation, households together,
right,
in tribes, in groups, either moving or in agricultural communities. Mm-hmm. So we are wired for that. And yet in America, in Western development, sometime after the automobile and some came in, and sometime after certainly World War II and post-war development, we needed millions of houses. And the desire was there, the economy was there, and the industry ramped up to be able to build this many houses. And so it was built around the scale of economy rather than the scale of community. The notion of the walk circle, when you would know people in your little community, be it agricultural or be it a nomadic tribe, by the people that you see every day. And that might be a handful of people that you would see within a few hundred yards of your home. Or it might be the distance of a horse in a day. We didn't have telephone, we didn't have the car. And as soon as that came along, then forget the hundreds of thousands of years that are inbred into how we communicate with one another. We just erased that. And we could call somebody across the city. We could call somebody even across the country. More expensive then, but you could. You could then have a car, which would then divorce your workplace from your home place. And zoning was trying to separate, by good reason, the impact of industry on residential. And so they said, well, let's separate these. And you could do that. And when the oil industry came in and said, well, we think there's a better way than trains, little streetcars going out. We're gonna save the country by putting everybody in a car. So that divorced home from work, and that completely shifted the nature of things. So the scale of economy took over, and the scale of community was well, good luck. It might happen, but probably not. And so that's what we're left with. And then the ramifications over a period of time is that we've got increases in isolation. Even though we're in a sea of homes, we're not connected. You're outside is you drive along the street. Who lives here? Well, 2 cars live here and 3 cars live there. And they've got a really grand, portico entry and this beautiful living room window that I never see anybody there because everybody's in the backyard. And so the streets become no man's land. And the communities become places where loneliness kicks in. And kids, when we're growing up, of course, the kids bring everything together. They go anywhere. And so the kids become the glue of community. And dogs, you're going out for a walk around the neighborhood with a dog, you're going to be coming in contact with people walking the dogs. But, well, dogs don't have a long life, and kids move away. And empty nesters find themselves, well, we've got our church, or we've got our bowling, or we've got our whatever. But over time, again, that becomes more and more isolated. And loneliness kicks in a very, very particular way, very particular ways, but across the range, with consequences, with physical health, with mental health, with well-being, with emotional health, with spiritual sense of where in the world do I live? Do I belong? What's the purpose? And consequences physically in terms of blood pressure, in terms of I can't name them all, but anyway, consequences, loneliness in the notion of where we live having direct consequences makes a huge difference. So that's key. That's really important.
Yeah. So then as you are working at more of the micro scale, at the neighborhood or pocket neighborhood scale, what are some of the things that you looked at to try to balance the need for security, but also that human need for connection with others? Because there's a lot of really interesting little specific aspects to it.
Good. I'm remembering back to your last question, and you talked about refuge and prospect. And that's one of the features. Yes, community, but also we've got a sense of we're in a safe place so we can look out to the world. This is back to human nature. We find ourselves comfortable at the edges, say, of a larger field, not out in the middle of the field. We feel more comfortable in a cafe, sitting where we can be maybe up against a wall and see who's coming in the door and see the other activities. We're not the table right out in the middle. This is human nature. And we know it. We feel it. And so when we can design our communities where we've got little refuge spot, but you can look out to shared space. What I have tried to do is to accentuate the layering from a public to private. So from the street, you might come through a gate, either an implied gate that when you pass the transition, you feel like you're entering into some kind of private territory, some kind of space that's not fully public. And if you're a stranger, you feel on alert. If that's your home, you feel, I've arrived. I've arrived back home. So we accentuate the gateways. So at the outer, meeting the street, into the shared space. When you're in the shared space, that's the shared commons. That's the territory of the nearby neighbors. And between that and the front door are maybe 5 more layers. So there's a transition between the shared space and the front door, which is the gateway to the private space. So it might be a low hedge at the edge of the commons. It might be a fence that defines private yard. I could step over it. It's not 4 feet high. It might be 30 inches, might be 2 feet. I could step over it, but it defines psychological personal space. And then there's maybe a small private yard. And this could happen in apartments as well. There's Jan Gehl talked about a soft edge. So you've got an edge next to the door that might have a spot for a chair, plants, a table. This is part of that soft edge. So the layers continue where you step up onto a porch. Now, by code, if it's less than 28 inches, you don't need a railing. We put a railing on. How high? Well, how high does it feel right if you're on the porch, to put a cup of coffee or a book? Or if I'm coming by for a short chat, I can sort of put my bum on the perch on the railing. And when you're inside, sitting on the porch, The railing is just enough where it feels like you've got some protection, but it's not a barrier. You're not sitting inside a cage. And so there's that feeling of enclosure, of refuge, and yet outlook. We put often in our projects, we will have flower boxes as another layer, but also as a place to personalize your own space, to say, this is my joy, but it's also an expression of who I am and who's here. I love marigolds, or I love whatever, geraniums. It's a personalization. It's an opportunity to express. The porches themselves are a layering from public to private. They are a place where it belongs to both. Porches are the key pattern, I think, of pocket neighborhoods. A good porch placed well, designed well, is so incredibly important. And then with that much layering, you don't need a New England barrier door, front door, that's just, a blank door going into the house, because there's no layering. With that much layering, we often include Dutch doors, where the top would have a leaf that opens, and the top would have a window, and the bottom is of course, solid. And it gives a person multiple choices. They can be all closed with the shades down, shades up. Maybe the top is open. Maybe the whole thing is open. And there might be signals to neighbors. If the top is open, there might be something that goes on among neighbors. Yeah, if you want to step in, and I'm ready for visitors. So that makes sense. Or I'm not, and you close it. Let me complete this thread by saying that the layers from public to private are inside the home as well. In America, we have since when? We've turned the houses around so that our worlds are oriented to our backyards and our backyard barbecues, and the front is to the street and the garages and the empty living room. So what we've done is to turn it back again. And we have the active rooms facing forward, facing the shared space. So we've got kitchens overlooking the commons. We've got living spaces overlooking the commons. Then we've got dens. We've got bedrooms farther back or up above and up above. And then the side yard becomes open to the face of the next building. That becomes the intermediate space. So you've got the front yard, the front porch, but you've also got the side yard, which could be layered. And as you get toward the back, you've got a back private realm, your little refuge garden. So the layering goes, through that. And when it's done well, you've got enough privacy, and families feel good. A person feels good in their deeper nature, not about style, but about human nature.
Yeah, this is a very detailed, wonky comment, but I have often been fascinated as I've had the chance to work on new housing and communities with sort of what you're talking about, on the inside of the house, reversing how we might think the floor plan and having that kitchen and dining space towards the front of the house, because people do really tend to, that's where people tend to gather and socialize, and there's activity all the time. And the idea of that being closer to the porch instead of the living room, which nowadays the living room really is a place where people go sit and watch TV. And there's not a lot of conversation necessarily happening. It's almost become more of a retreat type of space, a quieter space in a sense, whereas the kitchen and all is more active, and it seems to pair better with a front porch, in terms of those layers. I wonder what you think about that.
Absolutely. In some house design, I have done two spaces. I've done a kitchen eating with a window seat, maybe a place to, hang out. So it's an active food, talk, gathering place. It's just comfortable. Maybe there are bookshelves around. Maybe there are a door to the garden, a door to the, the side yard or whatever, door to the porch. And then we've got an away space, and that might be a quiet space that it might have a lower ceiling. It might have a, we up until we're trying to get away from propane. Before that, it was wood. We had a little fireplace, but it's a quiet place to retreat. It might be a place with media. It might be a place for reading. But it's a small house that has different zones. You've got a quiet zone and an active zone. You've got a more public zone, and you've got a private zone with the bedrooms and maybe a home office and so forth. So a small home can live large if it's zoned well.
Yeah.
And it's really important with a pocket neighborhood that the home design dovetails with the pocket neighborhood design. You can't take the best-selling plan on the internet and go plunk, 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 because it doesn't fit. It doesn't have the relationship to other spaces and other buildings themselves. And so as coming at this as an architect rather than a planner, I am coming at it from the personal space and detail point of view, and then moving outward to, well, how do these work together as a collective, as a group? And then in later years, moving on into neighborhood design. But again, I'm approaching it from an experiential point of view, from a personal, architect designing personal space to the wider neighborhood.
Yeah, and there's, I should probably just put a pin in and say for anybody, there's work of people we're not going to be able to talk much more about here today. But if people have the chance to if you're not familiar with the work of like Sarah Suzanka or Jan Gale or Holly White and what they have done in terms of how humans use space, those are all books to devour. I want to pick upon one thing in particular that you mentioned this in the article, but it relates to what we're just talking about, which is, this is a common pet peeve of mine, which is when houses are not designed inside out and outside in, thinking about the space outside and how people use the space. You often get rooms right up next to a sidewalk that feel so uncomfortable that the blinds are always pulled because you're right next to a very public space on the outside. This is really common in a lot of new construction, especially I see a lot of townhomes where this is done poorly. But there's also historical examples where I've seen this as well, where it just wasn't, adapted for the modern age. It's not thought of the same way. But you talk a lot about that relationship of like, if the inside and the outside don't match each other, you get blinds pulled all the time, which diminishes the feel of the house on the inside. And also, if you're outside, you don't see the human aspect inside the house.
Absolutely. Again, layers. When you've got enough layers, you've got choice. When you don't have enough layers, you close down, you shut off. An example of this is the motel, which, by the way, was an iteration of the old bungalow court.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just do a little side route here.
Sure.
This is kind of fun.
Yeah.
So in the 19-teens and early 20s in LA, the bungalow courts were taking off. And they were just such a hit because there were so many people coming in from elsewhere, Oklahoma and the East, and they'd land in LA and they'd rent a bungalow in a court. So they had instant community. And it was a new pattern, and the developers took it on, and they said, we'd be more efficient if we did that in a little apartment. So instead of detached houses, we'll do attached. And so then they did that. And then in 1923, 24, 25, the automobile came in. And so people were going out and they were traveling from LA to San Francisco or from here to there. And so they developed, I think in 1925, a motor, what's it called? Basically a motor hotel and a motor court hotel. And so they were to go from LA to San Francisco, there would be these car encampments. So you'd travel 8 hours and you'd rally the cars around. There'd be a place to camp. Well, then somebody had the idea, well, let's just have a court for cars. And they put up a sign about motor court hotel, and the sign person shortened it to motel. So that's the cottage court
Yeah.
with motel. So here we are, where you're driving. End of the day, you come in, you back your car up to your door, you empty your suitcases and whatever in, but somebody else could park right there, and the walkway is literally a person walking by can rub the window, clean the window or not. And so what do? You close the blinds, and so you're really close with no layering, and so you have no choice but to close the blinds. And when you have choice, you've got more ability. And I think that ties in with, again, our deeper sense of who we are and our well-being. When we are too exposed, we're under stress.
Mm.
When we're under stress every day, it becomes chronic stress. And the feedback physically, mentally, emotionally jams up on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's another small aspect of that, but if you feel like you have to have the blinds pulled all the time, you're probably not going to open the window either, which reduces the amount of fresh air that you might get into a house. Which is something that's good for us, to have that air circulation.
I'm going to reflect on this in the affordable housing world. And my article that I wrote, The Human Side of Housing, started out by reflection on the affordable housing, and that so much of both development as well as in our world, marketplace development, but also the affordable housing, the conversation is on metrics. How many dwelling units per acre? How much the cost per square foot? What's the AMI level that we're tapping into? What's all these metrics? And I've been to dozens of meetings, roundtables on affordable housing, conferences, workshops, and so forth. And it's all about metrics. And I recognize that what's missing is the human side, the unmeasurables that in the end make the difference. When a person moves into their affordable home, they're not wondering, well, how many dwelling units per acre is this? What did this cost per square foot? What can I do? And they do have a home. They've got a front door that they can close and they can lock. That's the first thing. And if you're stressed about that, and you've got a reasonable price that you can afford, that's the main stress reliever. But if it's left at that, it's not enough. And I think if we try to address our human needs, we're really touching in on, I think, the impact of agency, of well-being, of belonging. Those are the unmeasurables. And if those are not dealt with, they're soft costs that ultimately become more of a financial reality. And so it might be turnover. It might be antisocial behavior or worse. And those, or it might be vandalism, or it might be, those are costs that don't get into normal pro formas. And I think if we take time to address the deeper human needs, I think we're going to become happier as individuals, happier as communities. I think we're going to have more behaved communities. More than that, when people find their safe and happy place, they're going to find their own gift, their own purpose for being, their own sense of meaning, their own sense of belonging. And when they do that, then they can offer that out to the world. It might be simple. It might be just being there for someone else with a story. If you're stressed out, you're not going to have any availability. If you're in your happy place, you are going to sing. And when you sing, you're going to make other people feel better. Or maybe you've got something that you want to be an activist in your local community, to create a community garden or to plant street trees. You're not going to do that if you're stressed out. If you're in a happy place, you will.
Yeah. And, and it kind of cuts a little bit to the core of just some of the pushback I've had with the YIMBY movement, which I'm generally very supportive of. And I think we need to be building a lot more housing. We've made it way too hard to build housing generally in our country. But we have not long ago experienced a time where we built lots and lots of housing. And a lot of it was very inhumane and was torn down. A lot of it's already, there was a massive housing production in the 50s and 60s, not just the suburban development, but the urban renewal projects, many of which were so bad that they lasted barely a generation. So it's possible where we could build lots of housing, but we're not taking into account the actual needs of human beings, that housing becomes disposable or so antisocial that we have to remove it and start over again. And so there are lessons to be learned here.
I think as designers, as architects, as developers, as builders, we're involved in the hardware, metaphorically and tangibly. We're involved in the tangibles. The people that we're building for, it's the unmeasurable, it's the intangibles, and yet is the most important. Life, at the end of life, you're looking, well, how well was my life lived? What mattered most? And it's the simple things. And I think as people involved in creating the physical world, I think if we take on the embodiment of the user to imagine ourselves as a person in that space, I think we're going to have a better design, and we're going to have less consequence in terms of liability issues that feedback. They get, instead of escalating to a liability action, it becomes resolved in a simpler way. So I think that matters. When I'm working with critiquing other architects or students or whatever, I find myself coming in and saying, well, imagine that you are the UPS driver coming. What's your experience? Or the maybe your grandmother coming, if you're young enough, your grandmother coming in, and where does she park and how does she get there? Or if you've got something going on with dogs or noise, how does that get worked out? This is the human side, and design can help that to a great degree, but it's not everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to touch on one other sort of micro design aspect here that you talked a little bit about earlier when we talked about nested house plans. And I want to talk about this specifically because I learned about this when I was first working with John Anderson in the late 90s on the Doe Mill neighborhood in Chico, California. And I think John
worked with John on that.
Yeah, John learned it from you. But
I didn't know that, but I did. I was watching when that was happening. Somehow, I think my partner Jim Souls was aware of John and Doe Mill, and I was admiring that at the time. So I think mutual admiration.
It was a that
you worked on that.
Yeah, it was a really fun project, but one of the design issues. So for those who aren't aware, Doe Mill was planned as a 20-acre or so walkable community, and the lot sizes for the houses, almost entirely detached houses. There was one or two little courtyard projects, but most of them were detached houses. One of the real tricks and these were really small lots, like often 30, 35-foot lots. One of the tricks is what John would call the active and passive sides of houses. And because a common impression a lot of people would have who are not familiar with this type of design would say, oh my gosh, these houses, everything is so tightly packed. It just seems way too dense for me. There's no space. How am I going to enjoy it? But what we call the active and passive side, and I think what you called the nested house plans, really makes a difference. I wonder if you could talk a little about some of the specific tricks to make that work when you have much tighter quarters with houses closer together.
Well, nested house plan acknowledges that one side is active. It has windows that open larger. It have doors to the side yard, and the other side might have high windows or frosted windows, or might have skylights to bring light in, but you're not looking back. And so you have an open side and a closed side. So when I'm designing virtually all the houses that we have in our Good Fit collection are designed with an open side and a closed side. And so when I'm working on a design for a neighborhood, I have the footprints for all the houses. And the open side I designate in the little simple graphic of the building in yellow or in like an orange line. And so I can see which side of the house is active. And it then goes against another house which has a closed side. And so the side to side, I've got front side, closed side that match appropriately. And then I also include the porch and a layering to what might be the appropriate distance to the front line and the side. So it's got 4 sides: front side, back side, closed side, open side. And that happens at the detail level in the floor plan, and it happens at the neighborhood level when you can begin to put the plans down, not as undifferentiated rectangles, but as rectangles with 4 particular sides to it. And I think that matters.
Yeah, and I would say from my experience, working on those, that the thing that really struck us once we actually got vertical with the houses and there were the first group of or so that were done. It was remarkable when you go in those side yard spaces, how well that worked, how private the spaces felt. So you were in a small home on a small lot, but you really felt like you had this wonderful private outdoor space. It wasn't huge, not a very big space, but it was really delightful. And I think a lot, once we got people in the doors to look at those, they were generally surprised at how nicely that type of arrangement works.
It's your personal courtyard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's a particular, again, as if you're involved in development, you'll know that the property line, the building code says 5 feet. And if you're closer than that, you've got some code issues with openings. And so you can have the property line 5 feet away always, but for the side yard to be fully used, it's got to be more than 5 feet.
Yep.
So you give it to the open side house. And so the usable space goes to the face of the building, even though the property line is in the next door neighbor's yard. Is that right? Yeah, the next door neighbor's usable yard. And so what we do is to establish a limited use easement to the open side to allow them to use the land all the way up to the face of the building. And then that is reciprocal for the next house.
Right.
So they have their space. Otherwise, you've got a 6-foot-high fence, and behind it, 5 feet wide, it's a place for ladders and rusty lawnmowers and dead bicycles.
Right. Or you have the zero lot line approach, which means basically no windows, no eaves on that side of the house.
Right.
Yeah.
The other piece that is that I began to recognize is that usually the porches go out to the front, but if I can bring an entry into a porch through the side yard, then I activate the side yard. Or I might have a front porch, but I might have maybe a door off the kitchen going to the side yard. And that might be the place with the barbecue, the terrace, and there might be a layering of the side yard from back to front. There might be like maybe a 5-foot-high fence at the front of the building so that you can see over it, but when you sit down, you've got this little private courtyard behind it. And so you've got the layering of privacy in the side yard.
Yeah. This minor tangent a little bit, but I'm curious about one thing. So one thing we often talk about, just even my wife and I, but other architects we've talked about a lot, is like porches and why they get used or don't get used. There's a lot of older homes, and then there are also new homes built with porches that frequently don't get used. And I'm curious, from your perspective, do you feel like that has more to do with the design of the porch itself, or more to do with the layering, that aspect of layering from the street to the house? Or is there something else I'm not thinking about?
Well, the design of a porch is a science. It's really It's an art. It's a science. I think there are measurables in terms of neuroscience, in terms of measurements of view angles and so forth. By the way, Steve Muzan, I just want to say he has gotten a lot of material on this one. So check out Steve's work.
Absolutely.
I've studied it. I'm just really admire it. A porch, it varies depending upon the environment it's in. If it's in a really busy street and so forth, you want it higher. You want a higher railing. If it's in a more quiet, rural, detached area, it can be lower. It can be more open and exposed. I think a porch, if it's used, it depends upon its orientation. Is it a place that you can easily slip out from the inside to get to and slip back? Is it a place where it's just really comfortable outside, where you can have an outlook to what's going on, and while feeling held? If you've got your active area in the back of the house, the porch isn't going to be used because it's not easily accessible. If you're in the kitchen or in a whatever, and you just want to slip out to the porch, and that's where you have your during the summertime, your evening meal, or you hang out in the afternoon with a book. Good spot for it. If it's not easily accessible from the inside, it won't be used. Here's another thing. If your walkway comes right through the middle and the porch isn't wide enough and you walk sort of right through a natural sitting area, it's not going to feel as good. So we put the entrance to the side and have a room-sized layout that you're not interrupting. It feels comfortable to be in.
Yeah, those are great tips, and I can see them as we discuss it, and been on plenty of good porches and bad porches, and it's funny because it's a thing we wrestle with in our own 120-year-old house. Is it's a nice sized porch, but it's just not very well connected to the inside of the house, and so we don't use it as much as we might.
I think the height of the railing makes a difference, or if there is a railing. Sometimes you see these designs and they've got a porch, but it's not going to feel comfortable, not going to be safe. But then the other piece would be, okay, if you're in the Midwest where there are armies of mosquitoes, you want to have a screened porch.
Yeah.
And, how is it that the porches are used? I grew up in Minnesota, so I know this. I think they can be used and they can be engaged, but it's a different thing. And again, it's paying attention to what you know works and what feels right to you as you're designing it.
Yeah. Ross, I don't want to leave this without talking about the management of shared space as well, because I know this is something you've also given a ton of thought to. We could spend all day talking about the design details, but there's also the very human aspect of managing a small scale or a micro scale community. I wonder if you might share a couple of thoughts on just how you've seen people successfully approach that.
Well, it varies with renting and ownership. With renting, I think people naturally have less sense of territory, engagement, less of that. Sometimes you've got some people. When you own it, you feel more involved. We've done, or I've seen communities done, where the developer just wants everything sort of perfect, taken care of, and they hire in an outside management company to do that, or a landscape company. What that does is to remove the opportunity for nearby neighbors to just do even simple work together. And when you're out there in the springtime weeding, your hands are in the soil, and you're out there for maybe a once a month work party, you get to know what's going on with your neighbor. Get to hear about the kids or the vacation that they were on, or the this and the that. And then maybe the week later or 2 weeks later, I might be just really enjoying my music. Too late, too loud. And my next door neighbor would come over and say, "Hey, Ross, I got to get up really early in the morning, and I know you love your music, but you got to tone it down." So they reached out to me rather than calling the property manager or the police for something, who knows what. I mean, things could have escalated that much. The tension can dial down when you've got an opportunity to do simple work together. And it needs to be in balance. You can't have the layering of projects be so thick that the work becomes a burden. I think the work needs to become something that you do, and it can be a real source for enjoyment. It might be a once a month work day is actually pretty good. It might be just a part of an afternoon finished up with somebody's work is cooking up a big pot of soup, and all the neighbors bring in something to add to the soup. And then you have meals, together at the end of the day. So I think that work can be done not as a burden, but as a way in which we are taking part physically and engaging with our nearby neighbors. Can become really additive.
Yeah, and are there particular challenges to getting people, probably more so in an ownership situation, to get people, humans are humans, and sometimes we're just not going to get along with each other, where there might be petty squabbles. Are there things that you've seen that help with those approaches?
Well, yes, we're human, aren't we? There are always going to be challenges. We mentioned dogs, noise, kids, the neatniks versus the, hey, let it be people. And we need to have ways in which we live well together, ways in which we resolve our differences, ways in which we can make decisions, especially with money. And in America, in the last generation or two, we've kind of forgotten what we were supposed to be learning in preschool and kindergarten, how to share, how to express ourselves without hitting, express our frustrations without hitting, and so forth. So here we're in adult bodies and we're living together, and we have fewer choices to resolve our differences. And so that's when the management and the governance matter. And I think that, first of all, the scale matters. In small groups, I think we are more personable across our differences. In large groups, the HOA becomes this, oh my God, it's just too much. It's just a source of aggravation. And in small groups, I think there can become, again, we're back to the scale of making that work. And there are a lot of tools that have been brought along in the last 20 years or so, especially around co-housing, around how to run civil, productive meetings to allow all voices. And it may not be to the extreme of saying, look, no decision happens unless we have 100% consensus. It doesn't have to go that route. But it's not top-down management. It is the governance and the management, in my outlook, says take it to the lowest level that's appropriate. Don't bring the hierarchy of management. Don't let it be high. Let it be as low as possible. So it also means there's a backstop. Let's say, for example, if the commons isn't taken care of to a certain degree, well, then maybe there is a landscape company that comes in and does it, but everybody's going to pay for it. So management, governance makes a difference. I speak about it somewhat in the human side of housing piece, but there's a lot more information.
Yeah. Well, Ross, I'm afraid you and I could go on all day. And we might bore our listeners to death. So I probably should put a bow on this for now. Perhaps we can do another one in the future. But want to give you a chance if you have any summary thoughts or anything else that you want to share for people who want to either look into what you've done or reach out to you or anything like that. What would you suggest?
Well, we've covered a lot. And we've also just begun.
Yeah.
Maybe we could have a series on this.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that people got something they could take home wherever they are and however they are. I think that where we are in our time here, the mid 2020s, I think we're reaching some real challenging times with some threshold times. I think affordability is absolutely a crisis in many communities. I think we're trying to crack the nut on that and solve it. And I think that we can approach the solutions are multiple. It's not one solution. There are many. I think pocket neighborhoods provide an opportunity to get some of that affordability happening. It's on the human side around well-being. So it's not just affordability, but it's well-being as well. I think we can, lots of lessons around codes that enable rather than codes that become just more hurdles to get through. And details, both details matter and the big picture. And when it comes down to maybe the last word, I think is just root human experience. What's our human nature? And that's where our choices and decisions can come from. So thanks for this opportunity. This has been a really engaging conversation.
Well,
I can't believe an hour went by.
That's great. I mean, one of the joys of having a podcast is I get to have these kind of conversations with people that I admire. And so it's a lot of fun and perhaps we can do more in the future. So
good. I look forward to it.
All right. Well, Ross Chapin, thanks very much. And thanks everybody for listening. And we'll talk to you later.